Welcome back to part 3 of the lesson on project finance principles. This is the Project Management PrepCast, where you will get a quick return on your investment. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. As a reminder, in part 1 we covered a high-level discussion of what finance principles are, along with some examples. In part 2 you learned all about the time value of money. In part 3 right now we continue our discussion with forward-looking tools, including payback period and ROI, as well as the project manager's responsibility. We are piling up the knowledge of finance principle with every lesson. Let's keep going. Many projects are investments and may not make money, like in our housing example from earlier. The project improves something and the organization expects to get a payback sometime in the future on that improvement. This takes us straight to the next topic, the payback period. And you have probably heard this term before, but it's not about getting back at your little brother for what he did 20 years ago, especially because in our family I'm the little brother. To put payback period into technical terms, it is the length of time required to recover the cost of an investment. Take an example where a $10,000 investment returns $2,000 per year, and this would have a 5-year payback period. It's intuitively the measure that describes how long something takes to just pay for itself. I know you may be getting tired of hearing me say this, but I have to say it. As long as everything else, risk and all the other factors are the same and equal, shorter payback periods are preferable to longer payback periods, because it means your investment is paying a higher profit and you can reinvest the original amount you invested in the project sooner and get another return. For the exam, what you need to remember is that when you are comparing two payback periods of equal projects, then a payback period of 6 months is better than a payback period of 12 months. Pick the shorter one. However, you can't really evaluate a project on payback period alone. The focus of the payback period is when you get the money back that you invested. In general, this tells you how profitable the project output will be for the organization. But not always. Say you have 2 projects. One costs $1,000 with a payback period of 5 months, and the other one is $1,800 with a payback period of 6 months. Which is the better use of your money? The return on investment, commonly referred to as ROI, tells you which one is the better. The formula takes the gain minus the cost and divides it by the cost. Looking at the formula, you can see that the numerator is effectively profit. You could call it the benefit of the investment. The denominator is the cost of the investment. This can be expressed as a ratio, which is the way the formula is written, or as a percentage by simply multiplying the ratio by 100. It is yet another ratio where all other things being equal, the bigger the better, since the larger the number, the more profit you get from each dollar invested. So in other words, again, for the exam, the bigger ROI is the better ROI, and that's the one you should choose. Here's an example to make the point. Pretend you are the president of the Parent-Teacher Association for your son's school. Last year, the PTA ran a fundraiser. They asked for ideas on fundraisers, and 2 options came back. The Alpha Project, they wanted $1,000 to run a raffle, and the Beta Project, they wanted $1,800 to print and sell T-shirts. This year, you want to focus on the most profitable of these 2 options. For the Alpha Project, the $1,000 was spent on prizes and printing raffle tickets and posters. It had a payback period of 5 months and sold as many tickets as they could with a total ticket sale of $3,000. If you calculate out the ROI using the formula and numbers, it had a return on investment of 200%. The Beta Project is a group of parents who get together to sell T-shirts. It spent $1,800 on shirts, creating a design and printing the design on the shirts. It had a payback period of 6 months and spent the year selling the shirts at a total of $4,320. Let's calculate this one here using the formula. We end up with an ROI of 140%. Now we compare the 2 projects. If we compare them in terms of profit, we might think that the t-shirt project was better, as it had a profit of $2,520 versus the raffle with only $2,000. However, when you look at the return on investment, the ROI of the raffle project, it earned $2 from every dollar invested, while the t-shirt project only got $1.40 from every dollar invested. Well, all else being equal then, you as the president of the PTA should choose to do a raffle this year again. For the next concept, we have what is known as the benefit cost analysis, BCA, or cost benefit analysis, CBA. The CBA is really the process of looking at the quantitative and qualitative costs and benefits of a project. Cost-benefit analysis has two primary uses. First, you conduct an analysis of the cost to determine which has the higher benefit in order to identify the best investment or decision. In other words, if you were doing a business case, this would justify the project and support its feasibility. Second, you can provide a basis for comparing the projects. If you have a list of candidate projects to choose from, then you would want to look more closely to see the pros and cons of each project. One of the key quantitative methods in performing a cost-benefit analysis is using the benefit-cost ratio, and that ratio is very important. Here's what the benefit-cost ratio tells us. As the name implies, the benefit-cost ratio, or BCR, calculates a ratio between the discounted benefit and the discounted cost of a project. Discounted here means that it is the adjusted value of the investment in today's present terms. This makes both numbers relevant to each other, as the costs are usually at an earlier date than the benefit, which happens in the future. The bigger the difference between the benefit and the cost, the larger the ratio. A ratio of 5.1 indicates that this project is preferable over a project that only has a ratio of 3.5. Now we turn this around and say, all right, I have a BCR of 5.1. What does that mean? Well, it means that our benefits are 5.1 times greater than our cost. Instead of benefit, we could also say payback. So the payback is 5.1 times greater than our cost. For the last financial comparison tool, we look at the internal rate of return, or IRR. First of all, you do not need to know how to do this for the exam. This is because calculating the IRR can be a rather complex process where you add the present values of the returns for your investment at each investment period minus the cost of the investments in present value terms. To illustrate, here is a project that costs $250,000, including the various numbers you would need to calculate its IRR. But again, you don't have to do this. I have the number for you. In this case, the IRR would be 11.5%. You can test this by putting the numbers into Excel and using its IRR formula if you would like. This is a very good investment. Again, don't worry about the math. Think about the concept. An IRR of 11.5%, that is a very good investment. The IRR also tells you that you could actually borrow money at 11.5% interest to run the project and still break even in 6 years. By using the IRR, you can look at various investments, whether you are comparing the projects, investing in the stock market, buying new equipment, or whatever. The IRR is an objective comparison of which one is better. So, when talking about the IRR, the bigger the IRR, the better the investment. Although an IRR greater than 0 is okay, it's relatively easy for anyone to go to a bank and deposit the money in an interest-bearing financial instrument like a savings account or a certificate of deposit, a CD, or a time deposit. Therefore, a project is a good investment proposition if the IRR is greater than the common rate of interest that could be earned by a prevailing risk-free interest rate for the time frame of the investment. As you might guess, an IRR that is less than 0 means that you would lose money on that investment. One thing though, we have looked at these financial tools in isolation. By that I mean we looked at each one without considering the others. That's rarely the case. Together they add financial investment decisions and are particularly helpful in determining the cost of various options. Investment decisions are usually made long before the project gets to a project manager. Potential corporate initiatives are assessed based on high-level cost estimates, and the organization must first decide if they are using cash, equity, or debt to fund the various projects. Funding options, though, are revisited after more detailed cost estimates are developed. The PMP guide considers them to be part of determining the budget. However, as they affect project cost, they might cause you to revisit your cost estimates too. Sounding moderately simple as we describe them one by one, you need to understand that these tools can become very complex, as you rarely use them one by one, or one just on its own. Think back to our data center example. We originally used that to understand the opportunity and sunk cost. But what if we now looked at that same example for the time value of money and saw that the justification had an error? If we pulled all of these tools together to make a decision on whether to continue with building the data center or change to outsourcing, you can see the challenges that you would face. There is a reason that in the real world you team up with a good finance person in your organization. We do that because in the real world all things are never quite equal, and many factors and measures need to be carefully considered when you invest in a project, business, financial instrument, or other investments. We're leaving the equations behind to close this lesson. It's important to realize that making project finance arrangements involves many stakeholders. The list of stakeholders includes the sponsor, who owns equity in the project, and the lender, who provides loans. In some public-private partnerships, the government is involved, for example, when creating a long-term agreement with the private sector. Just as other projects, contractors may be involved to build, design, and execute work on the project, but then a separate party or operator is contractually obligated to run the project after it is built under the contract terms of the operation and maintenance contract. Of course, this list could continue and include the attorneys, financial and domain experts, and other people who support and must be involved in finalizing these deals. You may ask, why should I understand this? I'm just a project manager, I'm not the project financier. Yes, however, a good project manager needs to understand how things operate at the periphery of the project. A project manager must understand the project in the big picture in which it operates. We all know that without funding, projects never come to fruition. A project manager should know the source and costs of project funding. Knowing these sources, they can then also understand if and how the project is subject to financial risks, for example, rising interest rates or changing foreign currency exchange rates or inflation. Changes to pricing and supply of relevant goods and services all affect the project manager. These financial arrangements may dictate cash flow requirements. You should be aware of the financial stakes, interests, and roles of your stakeholders. Loan terms, which are also known as covenants, typically dictate project performance expectations that you, as a project manager, should be aware of and manage towards. What we are saying is that every project needs financing, but the complex set of project development, financing, and contractual obligations means that you, as a project manager, need to stay abreast of these arrangements. If you are listening to all of this and you're thinking, well, on my project, I don't operate under such a special project vehicle, what about me? The answer is that just because your current project does not operate under any of these vehicles does not mean that there aren't any for you to learn. They say money makes the world go round. You could say the same goes for projects. Money makes projects possible. Every project manager has to know project finance principles. In other words, a broader definition of project finance applies. These are the money topics that apply to projects no matter how they are funded. The motivation to learn and even master these financial principles remains valid, although the precise details may differ. Every project still needs funding, and financial risks, cash flow, and stakeholders still need to be managed. Less complex contractual agreements or less formal expectations may be set around project performance. However, you can be certain a financial aspect is likely to be involved. The ones we talked about are what you need to earn your certificate. But beyond these, you should also learn how to read an income statement and balance sheets. You should learn more about the fundamental business model of the organization that you work for, so that you understand what they value, understand how your organization makes a profit, and what its risks are. You should be knowledgeable of funding scenarios and understand how your project is funded. Is your project externally or internally funded? If so, by whom? We have discussed special funding vehicles and how funding and contractual obligations may dictate how you plan and monitor procurement or cost activities. Even in other types of projects, a better understanding of funding gives you a better idea of stakeholder relationships and their interests. Try to understand your project in a financial context. By this I mean, how does it contribute to the organization's overall financial objectives? By understanding financial accounting and contracting systems, you know where to look up information. Minimally, you should know where to look up information related to your own project's contracts and financials. Never confuse finance with accounting. Finance and accounting are two separate specialties that are interrelated. Accounting is focused on the measurement, processing, and communication of financial information. I have 2 review questions for you to see how well you did at comprehending the material. Which project would you recommend based on the following information? A. Project A with an NPV of 1 million. Project B with an NPV of 500,000. Project C with an NPV of 2.5 million, or Project D with an NPV of 0.75 million. As always, I'll give you some time to think about this so you can select what you think is the correct answer. If you have paid good attention, you know that the biggest NPV is the best NPV. Therefore, answer C is correct. All else being equal, you should select the project with the biggest net present value, and that is C, where the NPV is 2.5 million. For our next question, I would like to remind you that you will most likely not be asked minute details about the concepts we talked about. For example, I strongly doubt they will ask you to calculate an internal rate of return. It would, however, be fair game to ask you a question such as this one here. Which project would you recommend based on the following information? Project A with a high beta and high return. Project B with a high beta and a low return, Project C with a low beta and a high return, or Project D with a low beta and a high return. And then they also give you this footnote here explaining that beta represents a project's risk level. So as always, I'll give you about 10 seconds to think about this, but you may want to press pause and think about this for a little longer. Are you ready? Let's think about this. If beta represents the risk of a project, an investor is likely to choose a project with a low beta, in other words, low risk, with a relatively high rate of return. So low risk, high return, a great project. Therefore, the correct answer here would be C. I have 2 boxes, each one containing one takeaway from this part of the lesson. The first box, decisions on whether project options are viable are done by comparing payback periods, ROIs, and the internal rates of return, the IRR. The second box says focus on the highest return project, which must be greater than 0, and the bigger the better. And that means we are at the end of the lesson on project finance principles. Until next time.